Section 7 is unique among all the sections of the Doctrine and Covenants as the only section that is a translation of an ancient parchment. Here's the backstory. On the 7th of April, 1829, Joseph and Oliver had begun their sacred labor together of translating and scribing the Book of Mormon. Joseph's history records, "During the month of April, I continued to translate, and Oliver to write with little cessation, during which time we received several revelations. A difference of opinion arose between us about the account of John the Apostle, mentioned in the New Testament in John chapter 21-22, whether he died or whether he continued. The ambiguity of John 21-22 had stumped Bible readers for generations and led to divided interpretations. In that account, Jesus, speaking to Peter about the Apostle John, says, 'If I will that he tarry until I come, what is that to thee?' Note that Jesus here neither confirms nor denies that John will in fact live until Jesus' second coming, hence the differences of opinion. The impetus for this question between Joseph and Oliver during their Book of Mormon translation work may have been the passage on the plates now recorded in Alma 45:19, where both the biblical prophet Moses and the Book of Mormon prophet Alma are described as having possibly been taken up by the Spirit or buried by the hand of the Lord. But whatever the cause of the question between them, Joseph said, 'We mutually agreed to settle it by the Urim and Thummim,' and D&C 7 was the result of that inquiry. The section summary in the first printing of this revelation indicates that this section was translated from parchment, written and hid up by John the Beloved himself. Since Joseph and Oliver did not have John's parchment in their possession, it is likely that Joseph saw the parchment as he looked into the seer stones and received the English translation of that parchment at the same time. A few years later, as Joseph prepared the manuscript of Section 7 for its second publication in 1835, he added additional significant material to it, highlighted here in green. It is unlikely that all of this added material was part of John's original parchment. Most likely it was inspired clarification and interpolation added by the prophet, drawn in part from related scripture. More on that in a moment. So that's the backstory. Now let's dive into the revelation itself. The text of Section 7 begins in the first-person language of John himself, recounting his dialogue with the Lord. Verses 2-3 decisively cut through the centuries-old ambiguity and resolved the perennial dilemma once and for all. John was indeed given power over death and promised by the Lord that he would tarry until I come in my glory. Now, some of the language in this section is reminiscent of the language of 3 Nephi 28, where the Lord grants to 3 of his 12 disciples the same blessing here promised to John, and to 9 of his disciples the same blessing here promised to Peter. In fact, as the prophet Joseph later saw the strong similarities of circumstance between John and the 3 Nephites, he likely felt inspired to add some of the language of 3 Nephi 28 into Section 7 in the 1835 publication of this revelation, such as these phrases here. Additionally, Joseph seems to have drawn from the New Testament book of Hebrews for these 2 phrases here, while these other inspired additions, highlighted in orange, have no clear scriptural counterpart. Now, each of these additions to the 1835 version of this section illustrate a vital truth about Revelation. The prophet Joseph didn't view his revelations as static, rigid, complete, or perfect. Rather, he understood that even after they were received and written down, his revelatory text could later be clarified and added upon as more light and truth was received and understood, and as his ability to communicate that light and truth grew. Section 7, as we now have it, is a great example of how additional revelation can add clarification and richness to an original revelation. Now, the contributions of Section 7 go beyond answering the centuries-old question about John's living status and demonstrating how later revelation can build upon and clarify previous revelation. This section also does 3 additional things. First, as a translation of a missing Johannine parchment, this section also confirms what the Lord had recently told Oliver and Joseph in D&C 6, that there were ancient records and scriptures which were kept back and hidden because of iniquity. Section 7 is prime evidence that such records exist outside of the Book of Mormon. Next, it also confirms that Peter, James, and John were given vital keys which would play an important role prior to Jesus' second coming, a fact which would soon be confirmed to Joseph and Oliver when Peter, James, and John themselves appear to them and confer these very keys upon their heads. And finally, this section underscores the fact that the Lord truly is a granter of righteous desires that are aligned with His will. Although Peter and John received very different blessings from the Lord as to their lifespans, they both received from the Lord according to their desires, and both would have joy therein. These are the 5 major contributions of this section. And that's the story of Doctrine and Covenants 7.